I was stood in my grandmother's kitchen. I was raised in my grandmother's house. I think I was 3 years old. It was a rainy day. My grandmother's crippled. She sat in a chair in the corner, and there was a lady came in to see her. My grandmother was a bit of a sort of sage of the local community, and this lady had finished speaking to my grandmother, and she turned to me, as was the way in those days, and said, "Who is this young man?" And my grandmother said, because I wasn't allowed to speak, "This is George." And again, as was the way in those days, this lady said to me, "And what are you going to be when you grow up, George?" My grandmother answered, "He's going to be an electrical engineer." I have no idea where she got that from, but that was the origin of the, shall we say, the seed of me thinking about being an engineer, and then ultimately a business person. I loved engineering, but I also saw, when I was observing people going on in business, working in business, there's lots of exciting things to do with people, to do with some pretty important things. Engineering is wonderful. I loved it. I love it today. But is at some level still a bit, backroom, a little bit boffin-like. And it wasn't so much that I was seeking the limelight, but I wanted to do something important and significant. I got 2 pieces of advice when I was about 22 years old from a man called Charlie Cooksley, who was my boss, my section head. And I was a second-year undergraduate student, and I'd done my second-year industry period. He said, "The first piece of advice is lie a little." And I said, "What does that mean, Charlie?" And he said, "Well, people ask you questions, and is it black or white? And you always say it's black or it's white." He said, "The answer is sometimes grey. You need to learn how to answer grey." I don't know that I fully learned how to answer grey yet, but maybe it's not black or white anymore. Second piece was, he said, "Not all the world loves a clever devil." He said, "I have about 35 people working here. 6 or 7 of them have PhDs, more than half have master's degrees, and all but you have engineering degrees." And he said, "I see a gift in you that I've never seen in another person. You're an absolute natural engineer. You're the best of this group." He said, "But you intimidate people." And he said, "So sometimes, even though you're enthusiastic and you're evidently bright," he said, "sometimes that's not always the best thing that can be helpful for your career advancement." So he said, "Just be aware that sometimes that can cause problems for other people and for you." And the third piece of advice was from an old boss of mine. He was the chairman of Brunswick, and mostly throughout my career I was deeply involved in things, and perhaps erroneously thought the only things of value were the things I had my own fingerprints on. And he said to me, "George, you're going to have to stop telling people what to do or how to do things, because ultimately you'll always have to tell them how to do things." And I reflected on that going home that night, and I thought, he's right. You have to learn to work through other people, how to inspire and to delegate, because ultimately when you get to jobs which are so responsible, you can't do it all. And so now I have grown very comfortable with that, and that's essentially what I do now. I just try to inspire, I try to provide resources, try to give broad direction, and then keep out of the way. And it works very well. The way that I think about things is in pictures. I always think in pictures. And so I find that my mental view of this image that I have is not necessarily a painting in the classic sense of the word. Gives me a framework that I can sort of turn. I can look at it from behind, from above, from below, in a way. So I always have that vision, if we want to call it. But then I always pass the conclusions that come out of that through several other filters: experience filter, common sense filter, historical filter, financial filter, and then if that still doesn't tell me the answer, gut filter, and usually that's good enough to get a moderately good answer. Most people would judge my leadership style by 2 bookends. One is the inspiration, encouragement, coaching, the provision of resources and capability, but on the other hand, a relentless drive for the end of the mission. It has to be both, mixed in with all sorts of creative ideas that are dropped in along the way to help people. It's all part of the inspiration process. It doesn't even matter if the ideas are helpful or at least advance the cause. What it lets the people know is that you're interested, you're engaged, you're part of this, you believe in it. No matter what the system is, no matter what the product is, you can always make something better. And I think creators and innovators and ingenious people need this as the building blocks of their sort of progress. I think it's necessary in the kind of job I have, well, in particular in the kind of company I work for. It's absolutely vital, or it can't be successful unless you believe in the future and that you can do things to change the present to make a better future. Then you're going to struggle. The first conclusion that people would normally reach would be everything's moving to China, everything's moving to India. It actually doesn't have to be that way, because if you're, let me give you an example, if you're supplying a manufacturing line in Germany, you can't do it on a just-in-time basis with parts made in China. So a substantial part of manufacturing needs to be done near to market. And as these other economies modernize and the sort of labor arbitrage begins to erode, the necessity to manufacture in lower cost countries, at least those lower cost countries, begins to ease. And so I don't think that Britain or the United States or Germany need give up on those traditional industries. I mean, some industries do benefit from scale. I don't think I ever see the time where semiconductor manufacturing is going to move back from Korea and Japan and China. That sort of happened, and those industries do benefit from scale. But many other industries don't require that. And so I think as long as we continue to keep the skills here, we continue to invest, the government sets up conditions where it's encouraging for business to be in various countries, then those things will gradually pass through the system, and the possibility of a form of rebirth is available.